Arizona Science is supported by Research Corporation for Science Advancement.
For Arizona Public Media, I'm Tim Swindle, Professor Emeritus of Planetary Science at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Joining me today is Evan MacLean, an Associate Professor at the University of Arizona's College of Veterinary Medicine and Director of the Arizona Canine Cognition Center. Welcome, Evan.
Great to be here.
Evan, I think anyone who's ever had a dog or cat thinks that their pet is the smartest or maybe the dumbest animal ever, but you're trying to figure out how dogs actually think. How do you go about doing that?
Well, it's a challenge, obviously, because dogs can't talk to us. But fortunately, other scientists have figured out ways that we can ask nonverbal organisms questions. And a great example of this are young babies. So developmental psychologists often have to face a very similar challenge where we have young humans who can't talk, and we have to figure out how to pose a question that they can answer through their behavior. And that's exactly what we do with dogs. So essentially, we set up nonverbal problems where typically what the dog is doing are they're participating to try and find a food reward or to have some sort of interaction with somebody. But in the way that we structure that problem, we can set it up such that the animal's behavior gives us clues as to what's going on inside their mind.
Do dogs think the same way that people do?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. And I think this is actually the biggest challenge that people face when they think about the minds of animals, is they tend to think about animals as having some version of the human mind. And maybe it's, a mind like a child or something like that. But really, that's not the way that we should think about animal cognition, because there are different kinds of intelligence. And so animals can be fundamentally different from humans in the way that they think about some problems, but very similar to us in other ways. And we really have to get our heads around this idea that there are dimensions of the mind that are very hard for us to understand as humans.
Can you give an example of something that dogs think about in a very, very different way than we do?
One example with dogs have a very poor understanding of some things about the physical world. So if I were to play a very simple shell game with you and I showed you a quarter and I put it underneath one of two cups and then I just switched the positions of those cups and I asked you, where's the quarter? It would be very easy for you to indicate where that is. A problem like that is actually hard for dogs. But at the same time, dogs have been shown to, for example, learn the reference of new words in ways similar to 2-year-old children. And there are dogs that have vocabularies of over 1,000 different items, and they learn them. They learn these words very rapidly through inferential processes that are fundamental to the way that we acquire language as humans. So, we can see something that looks like brilliance in one domain and something that we just can't believe how dense dogs seem in another area.
One of the things that I know that you have been doing is studying dogs as they age. I've seen that compared to studying Alzheimer's in humans. Are dogs a good analogy for humans in aging?
We think so. So we think dogs are an interesting organism to study with respect to human aging very broadly, but also with respect to human cognitive aging. And one of the reasons that dogs are interesting to study from the perspective of aging generally are that unlike most of the animals we study in science, you can think about mice or rats that are kept in relatively homogeneous conditions in a laboratory environment. Dogs share the world with us, right? They breathe the same air that we do. They drink the same water that we do. They have variation in lifestyles in the same way that we do. But sadly, their lives unfold much more quickly than ours do. So we can learn about aging processes in 5 or 6 years in a study with dogs that might take 30 or 40 years to do a similar study in humans. When it comes to cognitive aging, dogs are really interesting because many dogs do exhibit cognitive decline as they reach their senior years. But just as in humans, a subset of dogs will develop a form of really profound dementia that looks a lot like Alzheimer's disease. So in the brain, it's characterized by the buildup of these proteins made up of beta amyloid, which are really one of the key signatures of Alzheimer's disease in humans. And there are very few other animals out there that seem to naturally and spontaneously develop this pathology. So we're hoping that by studying this in dogs, we can, number one, learn things that will help us care for aging dogs, but number two, will feed back into human medicine.
Do you care what kind of breeds you're studying? Are there differences between breeds in cognition that you need to tease out?
There are differences between breeds. They're not as big as some people think. So a dog's breed is not necessarily a destiny in terms of what their behavior or their cognition will be like, but there's variation. And one of the things we're very interested in doing in my lab is studying that variation.
Well, thank you for coming in, Evan. This is fascinating.
It's been great to be here.
Our guest today has been Evan MacLean, an expert on the way canines think. This is Tim Swindle, and you have been listening to Arizona Science. You can also listen to this and other Arizona Science segments by going to the AZPM website at azpm.org.
Thank you to Research Corporation for Science Advancement for their support of Arizona Science.